By the time the storm knocked out the lights, the 7 friends realized something far darker had arrived with them. Welcome to our channel, where we write fascinating tales of people, places, and values. Be sure to like and subscribe so that we can continue creating the stories you love. The late afternoon sun shimmered weakly through heavy, gray clouds as the group of friends arrived at the remote lakeside cabin. It was tucked away at the edge of a dense forest, a quaint structure with a slanted roof and weathered wooden walls that looked as if it had stood against countless storms. The air was crisp, carrying the faint tang of pine and the sharp edge of an approaching storm. Maria was the first to step out of the car, her long scarf fluttering in the cool breeze. She turned to her friends with a broad smile. "This place is perfect. Thanks for arranging it, Nate." Nate, always the planner, grinned and adjusted his glasses. "I thought it'd be great to get away from everything for your birthday. No cell reception, no distractions, just us and nature." He gestured to the cabin. "Come on, let's get settled before the rain hits." The others followed, hauling bags and supplies from the car trunks. There was Angela and her boyfriend, Matt, who were already bickering over who had forgotten the extra blanket. Jess and Liam, siblings with a knack for turning any situation into a playful argument, teased each other as they carried a cooler of drinks. Lastly, there was Zoe, quiet and observant, who lingered behind the group, scanning the towering trees with an expression that hovered between curiosity and unease. Inside the cabin, the air was cool but welcoming. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, surrounded by mismatched armchairs and a worn-out sofa. The windows offered a stunning view of the lake, its surface glassy and still, reflecting the ominous clouds above. The group began unpacking, laughter and chatter filling the space as they claimed their rooms and debated over sleeping arrangements. "We'll take the couch if it comes to that," Angela said, looping her arm around Matt. "Right, babe?" Matt rolled his eyes but nodded. "Sure, as long as I don't wake up with a crick in my neck." Maria clapped her hands, drawing everyone's attention. "Guys, this is going to be amazing. Thank you all for being here. It means so much." Jess smirked. "We're not just here for you, Maria. We're here for the cake." Speaking of which, Nate interjected, "I'll get started on dinner. Can someone help me in the kitchen?" As the evening settled in, the atmosphere grew warmer, the cabin coming alive with the smells of cooking and the sound of music playing softly from a portable speaker. They gathered around the table for dinner, sharing stories and toasts in honor of Maria's birthday. The storm outside grew closer, faint rumbles of thunder punctuating their conversation. After dinner, they moved to the living room, where Maria's birthday cake waited on the coffee table. Nate dimmed the lights and Angela lit the candles. As the flames flickered, casting a soft glow across the room, the group began to sing Happy Birthday. Maria closed her eyes, made a wish, and blew out the candles. The moment her breath extinguished the flames, a sudden clap of thunder shook the cabin, and the lights flickered before plunging them into darkness. "Whoa, talk about timing," Liam said with a nervous laugh. "Hang on," Nate said, fumbling for his phone's flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the concerned faces around him. "It's probably just the storm messing with the power. I'll check the fuse box." "I'll come with you," Matt offered, and the two disappeared into the hallway. The others huddled together, their phones casting weak glows. Maria's voice broke through the tense silence. "I'll grab some candles from the kitchen. Be right back." Zoe grabbed her arm. "Maybe we should all stay together." Maria laughed. "Relax, Zoe. I'll be fine." She gently pulled free and vanished into the darkness. Minutes passed. Nate and Matt returned, shaking their heads. "Couldn't find anything wrong with the fuse box," Nate said. "It'll probably come back on its own." "Where's Maria?" Angela asked, glancing around. "She went to get candles," Zoe said, her voice low. "But she should be back by now." A tense silence fell over the group. "I'll check the kitchen," Jess volunteered, grabbing a flashlight and heading off. Moments later, she returned, her face pale. "She's not there." The room buzzed with unease as everyone began calling out for Maria, their voices echoing through the cabin. They searched every room, but there was no sign of her. The unease turned to panic when they found her phone abandoned on the kitchen counter. Beside it was a single, chilling message scrawled in red lipstick on the fridge. You know why? The message on the fridge felt like a punch to the gut, silencing the group as they stared at the scrawled words. You know why? For a moment, no one moved. The room, already heavy with the darkness of the storm and the dim glow of their flashlights, seemed to shrink around them. What the hell does that mean? Angela's voice broke the silence, trembling with a mix of fear and confusion. Is this some kind of sick joke? Who would even do this? Jess added, her flashlight beam trembling as it swept the room. Maria wouldn't. She wouldn't just leave a message like that and disappear. Maybe she's trying to mess with us, Liam offered, though his voice lacked conviction. It's her birthday. Could be some weird prank. A prank? Zoe snapped, her usually calm demeanor cracking. Maria wouldn't do something like this. And even if she did, where is she now? She'd have come back by now. This isn't funny. Nate stepped closer to the fridge, studying the message. He reached out to touch the lipstick, smearing it slightly on his finger. This is fresh, he murmured. Whoever wrote this did it just now. Matt shook his head. Maybe someone's in the cabin. He turned toward the hallway, his flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. We need to check again. Thoroughly this time. The group moved together, their footsteps creaking on the wooden floors as they searched every corner of the cabin. They opened closets, checked under beds, and even peeked into the small attic through the pull-down hatch. Each empty room only heightened their unease. There's no one here, Angela said, her voice tight. Except us. Then where is Maria? Zoe's question hung in the air, unanswered. Nate exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Maybe she went outside, he said, though the suggestion seemed absurd even to him. The storm outside had intensified, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling through the trees. We should check. In this weather? Jess said, incredulous. If she went out there, she could get. She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. We don't have a choice, Nate said firmly. We need to find her. Reluctantly, the group donned jackets and grabbed umbrellas from the entryway. They stepped out into the storm, their flashlights barely cutting through the sheets of rain. The air was colder now, biting through their clothes as they called out Maria's name into the darkness. The search took them to the edge of the lake, its surface rippling violently under the force of the wind. Zoe's flashlight caught something at the water's edge, a pale piece of fabric caught on a broken branch. She knelt to pick it up, her heart sinking as she recognized it as part of Maria's scarf. Guys, she called, her voice barely audible over the storm. The others gathered around, their expressions darkening as they realized what she held. She was here, Matt said grimly, his eyes scanning the churning water. But why? Why would she come out here? Maybe she fell in, Liam said, though he sounded more horrified than convinced. We have to check the lake. How? Angela demanded. It's pitch black, and that water. It's dangerous in this weather. We can't just stand here, Nate said, his voice tight. We need to. He stopped abruptly as the beam of his flashlight caught something else. Footprints. Bare footprints, leading away from the water and back toward the cabin. Is that Maria? Zoe asked, her voice trembling. She's barefoot in this storm? We don't know that it's her, Nate said cautiously, though the thought unsettled him deeply. But we need to follow them. The group moved quickly, huddled together as they followed the trail. The prince led them back toward the cabin but veered off toward the tree line. The dense forest loomed ahead, its shadows seeming darker and more impenetrable in the storm. The footprints disappeared just at the edge of the trees. This doesn't make sense, Jess said, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would she come out here? Maybe she didn't, Zoe said, her eyes darting toward the trees. Maybe someone else did? Enough, Nate said sharply, though his own fear was evident. We're wasting time. We need to. A sudden, piercing scream cut through the storm, freezing them in their tracks. It was distant but unmistakable. Maria. That's her. Zoe cried, already moving toward the sound. The others followed, their panic propelling them forward into the forest. The trees closed in around them, their branches clawing at the group as they pushed deeper into the darkness. The storm seemed louder here, the wind howling through the canopy above. They called Maria's name, their voices lost in the chaos of the storm. Then, abruptly, they broke into a small clearing. In the center stood a single tree, its gnarled branches twisted unnaturally. At its base lay another piece of Maria's scarf, soaked and torn. "Maria!" Nate shouted, his voice cracking. But the clearing offered no answers, only the oppressive weight of the storm and the eerie presence of the tree. "We need to go back," Angela said, her voice shaking. "We can't stay out here. It's not safe." "Not without her," Zoe said firmly, though tears streaked her rain-soaked face. "We can't leave without her." Before anyone could respond, another sound cut through the storm. Not a scream this time, but laughter. Soft, chilling laughter that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The group froze, their fear reaching a breaking point as they stared at one another, unsure of what to do next. The soft, eerie laughter echoed through the clearing, carried by the wind in unnatural waves. It seemed to come from nowhere yet was all around them. The group huddled closer, their flashlights darting wildly, illuminating the rain-soaked forest. Each shifting shadow, each gust of wind seemed to take on a menacing shape. "Who's there?" Nate demanded, his voice cracking despite his attempt to sound authoritative. He stepped forward, his flashlight fixed on the gnarled tree at the clearing center. "Maria? Is that you?" The laughter ceased abruptly, leaving behind only the sound of the storm. The silence was almost worse, oppressive and unnatural. Jess clutched Liam's arm, her grip tight enough to leave marks. "We need to leave," she whispered, her voice shaking. "No. We can't," Zoe shot back, her face pale but resolute. "Maria's still out here. That was her scream we heard." "Was it?" Matt countered, his tone low and tense. "That laughter, that wasn't Maria. It couldn't have been." Angela took a step back, her flashlight trembling in her hands. "I don't care who it was. This place isn't right. We have to go back to the cabin and call for help." "There's no signal," Nate reminded her, frustration creeping into his voice. "You know that." "Then we try again," Angela snapped. "We try something. Anything. Staying here isn't helping." Zoe shook her head, stepping closer to the tree. The twisted branches loomed above her, their shapes grotesque in the flickering light. She bent down to pick up the torn piece of scarf, her fingers trembling as she held it up. "This proves she was here. We're close. I'm not leaving until we find her." "We don't even know if she's alive," Liam said hesitantly, the words stumbling out as if they physically pained him. Zoe whirled on him, her voice rising. "Don't say that. Don't even think it. Maria's out there and she's—" Her words faltered as tears mingled with the rain streaking her face. The group fell silent again, the storm's fury intensifying as if to fill the void. A sudden crack of lightning illuminated the forest for a split second, casting long, eerie shadows that danced and writhed. In that brief flash, Zoe's gaze snapped toward the edge of the clearing. "Wait," she said, her voice low and urgent. Did you see that?" "See what?" Nate asked, his flashlight following hers. "I saw," Zoe trailed off, her eyes scanning the darkness. "It looked like someone moving. Over there." "You're imagining things," Jess said, though her voice lacked conviction. "The shadows are playing tricks on us." Zoe didn't answer. Instead, she began walking toward the spot she'd seen the movement, her flashlight steady despite her shaking hands. "Zoe, wait," Matt called after her, but she didn't stop. The others reluctantly followed, their flashlights piercing the thick underbrush. The rain made every step treacherous, mud sucking at their shoes and roots threatening to trip them. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to close in tighter with every step. They emerged into another clearing, smaller and less distinct than the first. At its center lay something that made them all stop in their tracks. A circle of stones, carefully arranged, surrounded what appeared to be a small, crude wooden effigy. The figure was humanoid in shape, its limbs twisted and bent at odd angles. Tied around its neck was another piece of Maria's scarf. "What the hell is that?" Angela whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's like some kind of ritual thing," Liam said, stepping closer despite his clear discomfort. "Who would?" "It's fresh," Zoe interrupted, her voice hollow. The wood, it's not even wet. Someone was here. Recently. Nate bent down to examine the stones, his flashlight illuminating strange symbols carved into their surfaces. This doesn't make any sense, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Why would Maria? He stopped, shaking his head. It wasn't Maria, Matt said firmly. This is someone else. Someone who's still out here. The group's unease grew into full-blown panic as the implications sank in. They were no longer alone. Whoever had created the effigy was still nearby, watching, waiting. We need to get out of here, Jess said, her voice rising in pitch. I don't care about the storm or anything else. We need to go. No. And leave Maria? Zoe demanded, turning to face her. Maria might not even, Jess began, but the rest of her words were drowned out by another clap of thunder. Nate straightened up, his jaw tight. We can't stay here. Zoe, we'll come back for her if we have to, but we can't help her if we're... A sudden rustling from the trees cut him off. Every flashlight swung toward the sound, their beams converging on a dark shape just beyond the edge of the clearing. The group froze, their breath caught in their throats. Maria? Zoe called out, her voice trembling. But the shape didn't move. It just stood there, its silhouette barely visible through the rain. Then, slowly, it stepped forward. The group gasped as the figure came into view. It was Maria, but something about her was wrong. Her clothes were soaked, clinging to her frame, and her hair hung in dark, wet strands over her face. She didn't speak, didn't respond to their calls. She just stood there, staring at them with wide, unblinking eyes. Zoe took a step forward. Maria, are you okay? What happened? We were so worried. Before she could get any closer, Maria raised a hand. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, as if she were a puppet on strings. She pointed toward the effigy at the center of the clearing. Then, in a voice that didn't sound like her own, she spoke. You shouldn't have come. The group stood frozen, their flashlights casting trembling beams across Maria's soaked figure. The words she had spoken seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the storm around them. What do you mean? Zoe's voice cracked as she stepped closer to Maria, ignoring the restraining hand Matt tried to place on her arm. Maria, it's us. We're here to help you. Maria's head tilted slightly, her wet hair falling over one eye. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Then, in the same hollow, otherworldly voice, she repeated, You shouldn't have come. Her finger remained fixed on the crude effigy in the center of the clearing. We need to get out of here, Angela hissed, her voice trembling. This isn't normal. Something's wrong with her. We're not leaving her, Zoe snapped, whirling around to glare at Angela. She's scared. She needs us. She doesn't look scared, Jess muttered, her flashlight trained on Maria's expressionless face. She looks, I don't know, like she's not really there. We need answers, Nate said, his voice firm but low. He stepped forward, keeping his flashlight aimed at the ground to avoid blinding Maria. Maria, can you tell us what happened? Why did you leave the cabin? For a moment, Maria didn't respond. Her arms slowly lowered, the pointed finger falling limp at her side. Then, she began to walk toward the effigy, her steps slow and deliberate, like someone moving through a dream. The group parted instinctively to let her pass, their fear palpable as they watched her approach the strange figure. Don't touch it, Liam blurted out, his voice cracking. Maria, whatever that thing is, don't go near it. Maria stopped just short of the effigy, her gaze fixed on it. Then she spoke again, her voice softer this time but still carrying that eerie, disconnected quality. It's too late. What's too late? Zoe demanded, her desperation mounting. Maria, talk to us. What's going on? Maria turned her head slightly, just enough to look at Zoe out of the corner of her eye. They're already here, she said, her lips barely moving. Who's here? Nate pressed, stepping closer. Maria, tell us who. The words died in his throat as a sudden gust of wind tore through the clearing, extinguishing their flashlights in unison. Plunged into darkness, the group erupted into panicked shouts, their voices overlapping as they fumbled to reignite their lights. When the flashlights flickered back to life, Maria was gone. Maria! Zoe screamed, spinning in circles as her beam of light danced across the clearing. Maria, where are you? She was right there. Liam shouted, his voice rising in panic. She was right in front of us. This isn't happening, Angela muttered, backing away from the effigy. This can't be happening. Everyone calm down, Nate said, though his own voice was strained. He directed his flashlight toward the forest surrounding the clearing, its beam barely penetrating the dense, rain-soaked foliage. We'll find her. She couldn't have gone far. Are you kidding? Jess snapped. She didn't just walk away. She was standing right there, and then she was gone. What part of that seems normal to you? Before anyone could respond, a low, guttural sound emanated from the trees. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the storm, but it grew louder, more distinct. It was a voice, or voices, chanting in a language none of them recognized. What the hell is that? Matt whispered, his flashlight shaking as he turned in the direction of the sound. It's them, Zoe said, her voice trembling. Whoever Maria was talking about. They're here. The chanting grew louder, closer, the words reverberating through the clearing as if the forest itself were speaking. The group instinctively drew closer together, their fear reaching a fever pitch. We have to move, Nate said urgently. Back to the cabin. No. What about Maria? Zoe protested, tears streaming down her face. We'll figure out how to help her, Nate said, grabbing her arm. But we can't stay here. Whatever's happening, we need to get out of this clearing. The group turned and began running back through the forest, their flashlights bobbing wildly as they navigated the slippery ground. The chanting followed them, growing louder and more insistent, as if the voices were right behind them. Angela stumbled, letting out a cry as she hit the muddy ground. Matt and Jess stopped to help her, their movements frantic as they pulled her to her feet. Keep going, Nate shouted, his flashlight fixed on the faint outline of the path ahead. The cabin's not far. They burst out of the forest moments later, the sight of the cabin offering a fleeting sense of relief. But that relief evaporated as they drew closer. The front door, which they had left closed and locked, was now wide open, swinging on its hinges in the storm. Did anyone leave the door open? Liam asked, his voice trembling. No one answered. They exchanged uneasy glances before Nate took the lead, stepping cautiously onto the porch. He shone his flashlight inside, revealing the disheveled state of the living room. Furniture was overturned, and the remnants of their dinner lay scattered across the floor. The air inside was heavy, oppressive, as if the storm had seeped into the very walls. Stay together, Nate said firmly, motioning for the others to follow him inside. We'll barricade the door and figure out what to do. They entered the cabin, their footsteps hesitant as they took in the chaotic scene. The message on the fridge, "You know why," had been smeared, the red lipstick streaked as if someone had tried to wipe it away. The silence inside was almost unbearable, broken only by the sound of the storm outside. This isn't right, Jess said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's like someone's been in here. Or something, Liam added darkly. Zoe stepped into the center of the room, her flashlight scanning the overturned furniture. Maria, she called out, her voice echoing faintly. If you're here, please say something. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, from somewhere deep within the cabin, came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, moving closer. The sound of footsteps echoed through the cabin, each step measured and deliberate, as if whoever, or whatever, was approaching wanted to make their presence known. The group froze, their breaths caught in their throats as they stared at the darkened hallway leading deeper into the cabin. Maria? Zoe's voice was barely above a whisper, trembling with equal parts hope and dread. Her flashlight beam wavered as she pointed it toward the source of the noise. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the relentless pounding of the storm outside. Then, slowly, the floorboards creaked as the steps resumed, closer this time. We need to get out of here, Angela said, her voice cracking. She grabbed Matt's arm, her grip tight enough to make him wince. Right now. We're not leaving without Maria, Zoe shot back, her eyes fixed on the hallway. What if that's her? Does that sound like Maria to you? Jess hissed, her flashlight darting between the others. Whatever's in there isn't her. Everyone quiet, Nate said, his voice strained but commanding. He stepped forward cautiously, his flashlight steady as it illuminated the hallway. If someone's in here, we need to know who it is. Are you insane? Liam whispered harshly. You're going toward it? Before Nate could respond, the footsteps stopped again. The group held their breath, their flashlights trained on the darkness. Then, from the shadows, a figure stepped into the light. It was Maria. Her clothes were soaked, clinging to her frame, and her hair hung in tangled, wet strands over her face. Her bare feet left faint, muddy prints on the wooden floor. She stood motionless, her head tilted slightly to one side, her eyes wide and unblinking. Maria! Zoe exclaimed, rushing forward, but Nate grabbed her arm and held her back. Wait, he said firmly, his eyes locked on Maria. Something was off. Her movements were too rigid, her expression too vacant. Maria, where have you been? Maria didn't respond. She stood there, staring at them as if she didn't recognize them. Then, slowly, she raised a hand and pointed toward the living room. Her movements were jerky, almost mechanical. What is she pointing at? Matt asked, his voice barely audible. The group turned their flashlights in unison, following the direction of Maria's finger. Their beams landed on the message on the fridge. The smeared lipstick words, "You know why," seemed to glow unnaturally in the dim light. Beneath it, scrawled in fresh red streaks, was a new message. They're here. A cold wave of dread swept over the group. Who's here? Angela demanded, her voice rising in panic. Maria, what are you talking about? Maria didn't answer. She lowered her hand and turned slowly, walking back into the hallway without another word. Zoe tried to follow, but Nate held her back again. Something's wrong with her, he said, his voice urgent. She's not acting like herself. What are you saying? Zoe snapped, tears streaming down her face. That's Maria. We can't just let her wander off. Before anyone could respond, the sound of glass shattering filled the cabin, followed by the rush of cold wind. The group spun around, their flashlights illuminating the shattered window near the kitchen. Rain poured in, soaking the floor. What the hell is happening? Jess cried, backing away from the broken window. A deep, guttural growl resonated from outside, sending a jolt of fear through the group. It was low and menacing, unmistakably inhuman. The sound grew louder, closer, until it seemed to be just outside the cabin. Barricade the doors, Nate shouted, snapping the group into action. They scrambled to push furniture against the doors and windows, their movements frantic as the growling continued. The storm outside seemed to intensify, the howling wind and pounding rain almost drowning out the eerie noises. What is that? Liam shouted, his hands shaking as he helped shove a heavy armchair against the front door. I don't know, Nate admitted, his voice grim. But whatever it is, we're not letting it in. Zoe stood near the hallway, her flashlight aimed toward the darkness where Maria had disappeared. We can't just leave her back there, she said, her voice cracking. She's out there, alone. She's not alone, Angela muttered, her eyes darting toward the smashed window. None of us are. The growling outside grew louder, joined by the sound of heavy footsteps circling the cabin. The group huddled together, their flashlights flickering as the tension mounted. Then, abruptly, the noises stopped. The silence was deafening, stretching on for what felt like an eternity. The group exchanged uneasy glances, their breaths shallow and rapid. Maybe it's gone, Matt suggested, though his voice was shaky. Before anyone could respond, the front door rattled violently, the makeshift barricade trembling under the force of a sudden impact. The group screamed, their fear boiling over as they pressed against the barricade to reinforce it. The pounding continued, relentless and feral, as if whatever was outside wouldn't stop until it got in. We're not going to make it, Jess sobbed, her hands gripping the armchair with white-knuckled intensity. It's going to break through. Don't say that. Zoe shouted, her voice desperate. We just need to hold on. Suddenly, the pounding stopped. The group fell silent, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they waited, terrified, for what would happen next. The storm continued to rage outside, but the ominous presence seemed to have vanished. "Do you think it's gone?" Angela whispered, her voice barely audible. Before anyone could answer, a low, guttural voice spoke from the other side of the door. The words were slow and deliberate, spoken in a language none of them understood. The tone was mocking, almost amused. Zoe's flashlight flickered, the beam growing dimmer as the voice continued. She clutched it tightly, her hands trembling. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The voice stopped abruptly, and for a moment, the only sound was the storm. Then, without warning, the door exploded inward, sending the barricade toppling over. The group screamed as the dark, towering figure stepped into the cabin, its form barely illuminated by their dying flashlights. And then the lights went out completely. The world plunged into absolute darkness, the oppressive blackness broken only by the sounds of panicked breathing and the relentless storm outside. The group huddled together, their hearts pounding as they clutched one another for reassurance. "Flashlights?" Nate's voice cut through the chaos, strained but determined. "Get your flashlights back on." One by one, the beams flickered to life, casting feeble light into the cabin. The dark figure that had burst through the door was gone. Instead, the living room was a scene of chaos, overturned furniture, shattered glass, and the steady drip of rain pooling on the floor. The front door hung askew, swaying gently on its broken hinges. "Where is it?" Jess whispered, her voice trembling. "It was right there." "I don't know," Matt replied, his flashlight sweeping the room. "But we need to move. We can't stay here." "Where do we go?" Angela demanded, her voice on the verge of hysteria. "There's nowhere safe. We're trapped." Nate's flashlight settled on the hallway leading to the bedrooms. "We'll barricade ourselves in one of the rooms. It'll buy us some time to think." "And Maria?" Zoe snapped, her eyes glistening with tears. "We're just going to leave her out there?" "She's gone, Zoe," Nate said, his voice heavy with regret. "We can't help her if we're dead." Zoe opened her mouth to protest, but a sudden noise stopped her. A faint, rhythmic tapping echoed through the cabin, coming from somewhere above them. The group froze, their flashlights darting toward the ceiling. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if something heavy were moving across the roof. "It's on the roof," Liam whispered, his face pale. "What do we do?" "Stay together," Nate said firmly. "We're going to the bedroom at the end of the hall. Move quickly but stay quiet." The group moved as one, their footsteps muffled against the creaking floorboards. The tapping followed them, shifting along the roof in tandem with their movements. They reached the bedroom, and Nate pushed the door open, ushering everyone inside. Matt and Liam immediately began shoving furniture against the door, creating a makeshift barricade. The room was cramped, dominated by a single bed and a small dresser. The group huddled together, their flashlights casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. The tapping above had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. "Do you think it's gone?" Angela asked, her voice barely audible. "No," Zoe said bluntly, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. "It's waiting." As if in response, a deep, guttural growl reverberated through the room, this time coming from directly outside the door. The barricade trembled as something heavy slammed against it, causing the group to cry out in terror. "Hold it!" Nate shouted, throwing his weight against the barricade. Matt and Liam joined him, their combined strength barely keeping the door in place as the pounding continued. "It's going to get in." Jess sobbed, her back pressed against the wall. Zoe's flashlight beam caught something on the far wall, a small, square hatch leading to the attic. "There," she shouted, pointing. "We can climb up there." "Are you insane?" Angela shot back. "We don't know what's up there." "And we know what's out here?" Zoe retorted. Without waiting for an answer, she dragged the dresser beneath the hatch and climbed onto it. Using all her strength, she pushed the hatch open, revealing a dark, dusty space above. "Come on," she urged, extending a hand to Jess. One by one, the group clambered up into the attic, pulling the dresser up behind them to block the hatch. They huddled together in the suffocating darkness, their flashlights flickering weakly. The growling outside the door ceased, replaced by a new sound, scraping. Something was climbing the walls of the cabin, its claws raking against the wood. The group held their breath, their fear so thick it was almost tangible. "What is it?" Matt whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't know," Nate admitted. "But whatever it is, it's not going to stop." The scraping grew louder, closer, until it seemed to be directly outside the attic. The roof creaked under the weight of something massive, and the group pressed themselves against the far wall, their flashlights trembling in their hands. Then the roof began to splinter. A long, jagged crack appeared, and through it, they saw a single, gleaming eye staring back at them. It was unnaturally large, its gaze filled with a chilling intelligence. The creature let out a deafening roar, shaking the entire cabin. "Run!" Nate shouted, pushing the group toward the far end of the attic. They scrambled over beams and insulation, searching for an escape. Zoe's flashlight caught sight of a small vent leading outside. "Here!" she yelled, tearing at the vent cover. The group squeezed through one by one, emerging onto the slanted roof of the cabin. The storm raged around them, the rain and wind threatening to knock them off balance. "What now?" Angela cried, her voice barely audible over the storm. Before anyone could answer, the creature burst through the roof behind them, its massive form silhouetted against the lightning-lit sky. It let out another roar, its claws digging into the wood as it advanced toward them. "Jump!" Nate shouted, pointing toward the ground below. "Are you crazy?" Jess screamed, but there was no time to argue. One by one, they leapt from the roof, landing hard on the muddy ground. They scrambled to their feet, their bodies aching but adrenaline propelling them forward. The creature roared again, its massive frame filling the gap in the roof as it watched them. Then, to their horror, it began to climb down, its movements unnaturally fast and fluid. "To the lake!" Nate yelled, leading the group toward the water. The rain lashed at them as they ran, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Behind them, the creature let out another roar, closing the distance with terrifying speed. They reached the edge of the lake, its dark waters churning violently in the storm. "What now?" Liam demanded, his voice filled with desperation. Before anyone could answer, Zoe stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the creature. She clutched the last piece of Maria's scarf, now soaked and tattered. "It's me it wants," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I'll distract it. You all get to safety." "No," Nate protested, grabbing her arm. "We're not leaving you." "We don't have a choice," Zoe said firmly, pulling free. "Go." "No." Before anyone could stop her, she ran toward the creature, waving the scarf above her head. The creature's attention snapped to her, and it let out a deafening roar, charging after her. The others watched in stunned silence as Zoe led the creature away, her flashlight bobbing in the darkness until it disappeared entirely. The storm raged on, the rain mixing with their tears as they stood at the edge of the lake, unsure of what to do next. And then, the forest fell silent. Thank you for sticking around until the end. Again, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like and subscribe, and share this video with your friends.